Top 10 Personality disorder. The concept of personality disorder itself is much more recent and tentatively dates back to psychiatrist Philippe Pinel's 1801, a condition which he characterized as outbursts of rage and violence in the absence of any symptoms of psychosis, such as delusions and hallucinations. Across the English Channel, physician J.C. Pritchard coined the term moral insanity in 1835 to refer to a larger group of people who were characterized by morbid perversion of the natural feelings, affections, inclinations, temper, habits, moral dispositions and natural impulses, but the term, probably considered too broad and non-specific, soon fell into disuse. The majority of people with a personality disorder never come into contact with mental health services, and those who do usually do so in the context of another mental disorder or at a time of crisis, commonly after self-harming or breaking the law. Nevertheless, personality disorders are important to health professionals, because they predispose to mental disorder and affect the presentation and management of existing mental disorders. They also result in considerable distress and impairment, and so may need to be treated in their own right. Whether this ought to be the remit of the health professions is a matter of debate and controversy, especially with regard to those personality disorders which predispose to criminal activity, and which are often treated with the primary purpose of preventing crime. 10. An antic, obsessive compulsive personality disorder. An antic personality disorder is characterized by an excessive preoccupation with details, rules, lists, order, organization, or schedules, perfectionism so extreme that it prevents a task from being completed, and devotion to work and productivity at the expense of leisure and relationships. A person with an antic personality disorder is typically doubting and cautious, rigid and controlling, humorless, and miserly. His underlying anxiety arises from a perceived lack of control over a world that eludes his understanding, and the more he tries to exert control, the more out of control he feels. As a consequence, he has little tolerance for complexity or nuance, and tends to simplify the world by seeing things as either all good or all bad. His relationships with colleagues, friends, and family are often strained by the unreasonable and inflexible demands that he makes upon them. 9. Dependent personality disorder. Dependent personality disorder is characterized by a lack of self-confidence and an excessive need to be looked after. This person needs a lot of help in making everyday decisions and surrenders important life decisions to the care of others. He greatly fears abandonment and may go through considerable lengths to secure and maintain relationships. A person with dependent personality disorder sees himself as inadequate and helpless, and so surrenders his personal responsibility and submits himself to one or more protective others. He imagines that he is at one with these protective others, whom he idealizes as competent and powerful, and towards whom he behaves in a manner that is ingratiating and self-effacing. People with dependent personality disorder often end up with people who feed on the unconditional high regard in which they are held. Overall, people with dependent personality disorder maintain a naive and childlike perspective and have limited insight into themselves and others. This entrenches their dependency, leaving them vulnerable to abuse and exploitation. 8. Avoidant personality disorder. People with avoidant personality disorder believe that they are socially inept, unappealing, or inferior, and constantly fear being embarrassed, criticized, or rejected. They avoid meeting others unless they are certain of being liked and are restrained even in their intimate relationships. Avoidant personality disorder is strongly associated with anxiety disorders, and may also be associated with actual or felt rejection by parents or peers in childhood. Research suggests that people with avoidant personality disorder excessively monitor internal reactions, both their own and those of others, which prevents them from engaging naturally or fluently in social situations. A vicious circle takes hold in which the more they monitor their internal reactions, the more inept they feel, and the more inept they feel, the more they monitor their internal reactions. 7. Narcissistic personality disorder. In narcissistic personality disorder, the person has an extreme feeling of self-importance, a sense of entitlement, and a need to be admired. He is envious of others and expects them to be the same of him. He lacks empathy and readily lies and exploits others to achieve his aims. To others, he may seem self-absorbed, controlling, intolerant, selfish, or insensitive. If he feels obstructed or ridiculed, he can fly into a fit of destructive anger and revenge. Such a reaction is sometimes called narcissistic rage and can have disastrous consequences for all those involved. 6. Histrionic personality disorder. People with histrionic personality disorder lack a sense of self-worth and depend on attracting the attention and approval of others for their well-being. They often seem to be dramatizing or playing a part in a bid to be heard and seen. People with histrionic personality disorder may take great care of their appearance and behave in a manner that is overly charming or inappropriately seductive. As they crave excitement and act on impulse or suggestion, they can place themselves at risk of accident or exploitation. Their dealings with others often seem insincere or superficial, which in the longer term can adversely impact their social and romantic relationships. This is especially distressing to them, as they are sensitive to criticism and rejection and react badly to loss or failure. A vicious circle may take hold in which the more rejected they feel, the more histrionic they become, and the more histrionic they become, the more rejected they feel. It can be argued that a vicious circle of some kind is at the heart of every personality disorder and, indeed, every mental disorder. 5. Borderline personality disorder. In borderline personality disorder or emotionally unstable personality disorder, the person essentially lacks a sense of self and, as a result, experiences feelings of emptiness and fears of abandonment. There is a pattern of intense but unstable relationships, emotional instability, outbursts of anger and violence especially in response to criticism, and impulsive behavior. Suicidal threats and acts of self-harm are common, for which reason many people with borderline personality disorder frequently come to medical attention. Borderline personality disorder was so called because it was thought to lie on the borderline between neurotic, anxiety disorders and psychotic disorders, such as schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. It has been suggested that borderline personality disorder often results from childhood sexual abuse, and that it is more common in women, in part because women are more likely to suffer sexual abuse. However, feminists have argued that borderline personality disorder is more common in women, because women presenting with angry and promiscuous behavior tend to be labeled with it, whereas men presenting with similar behavior tend instead to be labeled with antisocial personality disorder. 4. Antisocial personality disorder. Until psychiatrist Kurt Schneider broadened the concept of personality disorder to include those who suffer from their abnormality, personality disorder was more or less synonymous with antisocial personality disorder. Antisocial personality disorder is much more common in men than in women and is characterized by a callous unconcern for the feelings of others. The person disregards social rules and obligations, is irritable and aggressive, acts impulsively, lacks guilt, and fails to learn from experience. In many cases, he has no difficulty finding relationships, and can even appear superficially charming, the so-called charming psychopath, but these relationships are usually fiery, turbulent, and short-lived. As antisocial personality disorder is the mental disorder most closely correlated with crime, he is likely to have a criminal record or a history of being in and out of prison. 3. Schizotypal disorder. Schizotypal personality disorder is characterized by oddities of appearance, behavior, and speech, unusual perceptual experiences, and anomalies of thinking similar to those seen in schizophrenia. These latter can include odd beliefs, magical thinking for instance, thinking that speaking of the devil can make him appear, suspiciousness, and obsessive ruminations. People with schizotypal personality disorder often fear social interaction and think of others as harmful. This may lead them to develop so-called ideas of reference, that is, beliefs or intuitions that events and happenings are somehow related to them. So whereas people with schizotypal personality disorder and people with schizoid personality disorder both avoid social interaction, with the former it is because they fear others, whereas with the latter it is because they have no desire to interact with others or find interacting with others too difficult. People with schizotypal personality disorder have a higher than average probability of developing schizophrenia, and the condition used to be called latent schizophrenia. 2. Schizoid personality disorder. The term schizoid designates a natural tendency to direct attention toward one's inner life and away from the external world. A person with schizoid personality disorder is detached and aloof and prone to introspection and fantasy. He has no desire for social or sexual relationships, is indifferent to others and to social norms and conventions, and lacks emotional response. A competing theory about people with schizoid personality disorder is that they are in fact highly sensitive with a rich inner life. They experience a deep longing for intimacy, but find initiating and maintaining close relationships too difficult or distressing, and so retreat into their inner world. People with schizoid personality disorder rarely present to medical attention, because despite their reluctance to form close relationships, they are generally well-functioning and quite untroubled by their apparent oddness. 1. Paranoid personality disorder. Paranoid personality disorder is characterized by a pervasive distrust of others, including even friends, family, and partners. As a result, this person is guarded, suspicious, and constantly on the lookout for clues or suggestions to validate his fears. He also has a strong sense of personal rights, he is overly sensitive to setbacks and rebuffs, easily feels shame and humiliation, and persistently bears grudges. Unsurprisingly, he tends to withdraw from others and to struggle with building close relationships. The principal ego defense in paranoid personality disorder is projection, which involves attributing one's unacceptable thoughts and feelings to other people. A large, long-term twin study found that paranoid personality disorder is modestly heritable, and that it shares a portion of its genetic and environmental risk factors with schizoid personality disorder and schizotypal personality disorder. While personality disorders may differ from mental disorders, like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, they do, by definition, lead to significant impairment. They are estimated to affect about 10% of people, although this figure ultimately depends on where clinicians draw the line between a normal personality and one that leads to significant impairment. Characterizing the 10 personality disorders is difficult, but diagnosing them reliably is even more so. For instance, how far from the norm must personality traits deviate before they can be counted as disordered? How significant is significant impairment? And how is impairment to be defined? Whatever the answers to these questions, they are bound to include a large part of subjectivity. Personal dislike, prejudice, or a clash of values can all play a part in arriving at a diagnosis of personality disorder, and it has been argued that the diagnosis amounts to little more than a convenient label for undesirables and social deviance. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe and click on the bell icon to watch more interesting and informational videos in future.